Hi, Joel Wendt here, doing more of my video blog, my political video blog on the Second American Revolution. And I want to talk a little bit about different attitudes that people have. I've stated previously that the revolution is over. We won because we're waking up. Not everybody quite believes that, obviously. A lot of people would like to see all kinds of things be different. If you think about that, you'll realize that we can always do that. It doesn't make any difference what state any society is in. There will always be people who think it should be improved in one direction or another. I'm talking about something a little more subtle, which is what has happened because we're finally waking up to the influence of the financial elites on our way of life and beginning to recognize that government is not very helpful and that now we need to turn to ourselves. And that's a long-term process that's being enacted. But in any event, today I wanted to talk about a book. There's the book by Ralph Nader, Only the Super Rich Can Save Us. This is a big book. My God, it weighs about 20 pounds, 730 some pages, and that's without footnotes or a bibliography. Now, what did he write a book about? Well, as most of us know, Nader is someone who has at his fingertips and in the files in his mind a great deal of information about a large number of issues, and this is pretty important. This is a lot of information that he has. He knows the nature of a lot of problems and what kind of solutions might work. In this book, on the surface it appears that it's a novel, although he says it isn't a novel. Might be better be called a fantasy. He doesn't call it a fantasy, but I'm going to call it a fantasy. And the fantasy in this case is that he's written a story in which certain individuals, some of which we know, and some of which we could know of if we knew more about various organizations. But in any event, these people are all basically involved in one or another kind of prominent activity. And most of them are very, 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 very rich. Now, what Ralph Nader has done is something kind of interesting, which I think any one of us can do, but it's a bit dangerous on one sense because it will lead you into, I think, a kind of delusional thinking, which is what Mr. Nader has done. Now, what did he do? Well, he wrote this story as if these various individuals, such as Warren Buffett, Yoko Ono, and on and on and on. I could read a little short list here of the dramatis personae in the book. Warren Buffett, Bill Cosby, Barry Diller, Phil Donahue, William Gates Sr., Joe Jamal, Peter Lewis, Paul Newman, Yoko Ono, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, what we really have in this novel is two things. One is we have an imagination of Ralph Nader about how all the problems that he sees that are wrong with the world could be fixed. If people with lots of money and potential influence, of course there's no guarantee that their influence will play out the way he does in his story or his fantasy, but nevertheless, basically what he's done is written a book in which there's a character named Warren Buffett who probably has no relationship whatsoever to the real human being Warren Buffett. In a sense, he's what we do a lot in our thinking sometimes. He's Warren Buffett as if Ralph Nader was inside his head. Ralph Nader says, well, if I was Warren Buffett and had all his money and his connections, this is what I would do. And he's done that with all these different characters. He's inhabited their shell, you might say, their name, and then laid out what they could do in the world. And in a certain level, I think this is a kind of an interesting thing to do. But I don't know that it's worth reading 700 pages. I don't think this is a very useful book. One, because it's not very realistic in the sense of Warren Buffett is never going to let Ralph Nader get inside his head, nor is Bill Cosby or Yoko Ono or Bill Gates Jr. or anybody else like that. They're going to be who they are, and they're going to have the attitudes that they are, and they're not going to all of a sudden think, oh, if we just do a bunch of stuff that Ralph Nader thinks we should do, we're going to fix the world. That isn't how the world works. The world doesn't really work that way. And if we as citizens of the United States of America, who I'm mostly talking to, although a lot of this could apply in other places as well, want to actually influence the world, we need to understand it. And that's where the rub comes. This book doesn't help us understand the world, except that it gives an example of a certain kind of thinking that's fairly common, which is when we put ourselves inside another person and imagine if they would only do what we think. And that's an important thing to understand about how the world works. We have, a lot of us, share this kind of thinking, which is thinking which says, well, if Jones would only do what I think, everything would be all right. And you can actually break this down, and I've done this in my writing. There's a sort of logical statement that one can make. It goes, if X would only do Y, then Z would be the result. And you can read this all over the place. You can read this in lots and lots of writing. Lots of liberals, lots of conservatives. Doesn't make much difference. It's a very human thing to make this kind of assumption that if only this person, who's not me, would think like me and do like I would do if I was inside their skin, then a certain result would happen. And of course sometimes it's a very limited kind of thing that's thought, a kind of personal thing in which a very single manifestation, if only Elvis Presley had done something else, something better would have happened. A lot of thinking that's like this is a little more massive. It might be if only liberals would think like conservatives, then we'd have a great world. Or if only conservatives would think like liberals, we would have a great world. The problem that I'm trying to point out is the flaw in that thought, the basic flaw, that if X would only do Y, then Z would be the result. And it's flawed in two ways. One is the first part of the statement, which is if X would only do Y. X isn't going to do Y. We have to approach X in a whole different direction if we hope to see him change his behavior from what he's already doing. Now the second part of the statement is also flawed, which is if X would only do Y, then Z would be the result. That's an assumption on our part, and it's a big one. But nevertheless, it's the way we generally think. And this is a book which sort of goes into that in great detail, and a great fantastic detail, where Ralph Nader has imagined all these rich people doing what he thinks they should do in order to solve the problems that he's identified in the way he's identified them. We're not going to fix things that way.